In this video, we're going to discuss how to set up your forecast if you have highly seasonal products. And what does that mean? Some of the best practices in terms of highly seasonal products in SoStock. So first of all, what is a highly seasonal product? A highly seasonal product means something like this, where you sell literally nothing most of the year. And then maybe 1 or 2 months out of the year, you sell a bunch. Like let's say this was you only sell during October, November. Maybe it's a Halloween product, or maybe it's a Christmas time product, or maybe it's a summertime product. But you really sell almost nothing the entire year, and you don't want to sell anything most of the year. So how do you set that up? So first of all, by default, you'll see over here, we're looking at all of the velocity periods, and we don't want to do that because the system is going to average all of these days, which includes this seasonal spike here. And then it's going to average that out into daily velocity. But we're not going to sell 7 units a day moving forward because we already passed that season. Okay, so there's a couple of things that we want to do. The first thing that we want to do is we want to go to our settings page over here. And I'm going to open this up in a new tab. And we want to make sure that our inventory timeline is set up to 12 months so we can get a full 12-month forecast. If you go to forecast settings, you will see here that by default, it's normally set to 8 months. We want to set that to 12 months. So that's step 1. Save that, and then your forecast timeline is going to go a full 12 months into the future. The reason it's preset to 8 months is because most people aren't really forecasting a full year ahead of time, and building a 12-month timeline for every product in SoStock takes a lot of time and a lot of processing time and data. So just to make things run faster, we default it to 8. But if you set yours for 12, that's step 1. The next step is we don't want to use this data up here. So what we want to do in this case is we're going to want to use last year's sales. Last year's sales is going to look at day by day, or in this case, I'll just look at monthly. How many units am I selling each month of the year? And you can see that I really only sell for 2 months out of the year. Maybe I sell 1 unit here, 1 unit there, but we don't care about that. We're really looking at a majority of our sales are made in October and November. So I'm going to save this to last year's sales instead. Now this will only work, of course, if you have a full year's worth of sales history. If you just launched this product, we have to actually do other workarounds for that product because there's no sales history to build from. But assuming you have a full year of sales history, we're simply going to replicate that 100% using last year's sales. Okay, some of the other settings that we want to talk about to make sure that this is not inflated in any way. If we scroll down here to our tools, we want to make sure that our stockouts tool is turned off. Now, why would we want our stockout tool turned off? Because we intend to be stocked out for most of the year. And if you turn the stockout tool on, which I'll show you in a minute, what's going to happen is it's going to look at all of my off-season stockouts, and it's going to try to replace those off-season stockouts with an average of what we would have sold if we were in stock using the sales data from when we were in stock. So if I turn that on and I've got all these stockouts for the whole year, which most of those are intentional, look what happens to my forecast. So now my forecast has inflated all of my off-season sales based on what I would have sold if I were in stock. Because what the stockout tool is doing is it's looking 30 or 60 days around each of those stockout periods to try to filter them out of your forecast. But we want to be stocked out for these months. So I want to turn the stockout tool off. So we will turn this off and resave the stockout tool turned off. And now the graph is back to the way it was. So this is a good replication of what I would sell if I duplicated last year exactly. Now, if there are some stockouts during the peak sales period that I want to filter out, unfortunately, at this time, we can't really have a stockout tool turned on for a portion of the year and off for a portion of the year. So it's kind of an all or nothing type of thing. If you have some stockouts during these periods, then the solution would be to come down here and fill in those gaps using the Lightning Deals tool. The Lightning Deals tool is a tool where you can fill in gaps and you can simulate number of units sold for a certain period of time. So let's say I had a small stock out during November, and I want to, in November of 24, let's say I had a stock out in November 23, the last week I stocked out. So I would come in here and I would just basically simulate that last week's worth of sales by putting in a lightning deal. And I think I can sell whatever, 100 units that week or whatever a realistic number is. I would fill that in with a lightning deal. Again, the lightning deal is just a period of time and a number of units that will be sold for that period. And I would save it. And for that period, it will add additional sales, additional velocity into that chosen period of time. We do not want to use any of the seasonal spikes tools here. And the reason being, you can't actually turn on automated seasonal spikes with last year's sales turned on purpose. We set it up that way because the last year's sales tool is actually using a percentage of an average. And when you're selling 0 units a month for 8 or 9 or 10 months out of the year, you can't really average 0, and you can't build an average on top of 0 sales. So we disabled that when you're using last year's sales because you're trying to stack seasonality on top of seasonality. Technically, you could put in a seasonal spike, but this works in percentages. So again, that doesn't really make sense. If today's velocity is 0, you can't build a percentage on top of 0. That's why I recommend using the lightning deals tool to fill in units for those periods of time that you want to simulate additional sales or fill in a stock out or whatever. The next thing to discuss is the trend tool. So let's say you're selling a little bit more, you plan on selling a little bit more, or maybe you sold a little bit more this year compared to last year. Now, I don't see last year's sales on this graph because it starts at December, but let's say that we did sell a little bit in October and November of 22, and we sold more in October and November of 23. I can use the trend tool, and how I would want to set up the trend tool is want to set this up to the last 365 days. So we're looking year over year, if I was up or down for a full year worth of sales compared to the previous year, right? January of 22 to January of 23 is the purple number. I sold 1,113 units for the whole year. And then this last year, January of 23 to yesterday, January 7th, 24, I sold only 1,039. So I'm actually down by 6%. So whether that's down or up, if I want to use the trend tool, we need to make sure we're looking at a full 365 days year over year, and I can add that additional or negative sales growth to my graph. Now it's hard to see because it's only 6%, but this graph is technically now 6% lower than this graph. So we're just taking that trend and applying it to this year's sales. Now by default, the system is not going to tell you to send inventory in if you don't need it. But if you have any kind of min-max restocking and you're trying to keep minimum inventory at your warehouse, but you don't want to place an order until a particular period of time, you can also use this tool down here, which is snooze orders. You can actually snooze orders and transfers until a given period. Let's say I don't place my orders until August or July. That's probably more realistic on this graph, like 2 months before I actually start selling. I would snooze orders for until a particular date. In this case, I want to snooze orders until July, let's say, 1st. And that way the system is not telling me to place any orders until the month when I actually start placing my POs for the upcoming season. So I can snooze orders for a particular period of time. And just in case I do have inventory at my warehouse and I want to make sure SoStock doesn't tell me to transfer it until my seasonal period, I can also snooze transfers from my warehouse until a period of time as well. Same thing. One last thing, you can also turn on additional sales growth. So let's say, I'm going to turn this one off for now. Let's say I don't care about my trend. I plan on marketing this product and I plan on selling more this year than I did last year. Rather than using the lightning deals tool or additional sales spikes, I can actually just add a seasonal growth, additional sales growth down here. So I can say I want to do 50% or 25% more than I did last year. And obviously 25% times 0 is still 0, so these months are not affected. But when I start selling, that's going to increase my entire timeline for the sales period that I'm actually selling by 25% or whatever I've chosen. So that's a great way to improve. If I did have a little bit of stock outs, or I plan on selling more this year than last year, I can just use that additional sales growth tool as well. If you follow these basic guidelines, you're going to have a meaningful, highly seasonal forecast that makes sense, and you should get a lot out of it.